Some people think that the Liam Neeson renaissance started with the release of Taken back in 2008, but I tend to disagree. I think it started here, right here with 2011's The Grey. At first glance, you might see a film about plane crash survivors striving to stay alive in the frozen wasteland of Alaska under constant threat of ravenous wolves, but no, that's not what this film is about. I mean, not really. Part of that misconception is mostly due to how this film was marketed as an action thriller about humans versus wolves, but in reality, it's no more about the wolves than The Walking Dead is about the zombies. However, it is about humanity. While working on the A-Team together, director Joe Carnahan pitched a script to Liam Neeson and he was pretty much on board from the jump. Filming on location in the freezing temperatures of Canada, the cast and crew were put through hell, as Carnahan would often say he didn't want to film them acting. He wanted to film them behaving, so the reactions you see from these actors dealing with the sheer cold are visceral and authentic, giving a sense of realism to this very intimate story. The wolves, in conjunction with the hostile environment, play the role of an observable antagonist for our characters, but ultimately are a backdrop for a 2-hour exercise in the tenacity of the human spirit. The focus character of The Grey is Hunter John Otway, hired by an oil company to protect the company's other workers from the local wildlife. Otway is facing an existential crisis as he reveals in a letter to his wife that she seemingly left him and he no longer feels he has any reason to live. The last 4 lines of the letter hauntingly read, "Once more into the fray, into the last good fight I'll ever know. Live and die on this day. Live and die on this day." Through the context of his current mindset, we the audience assume this to be an embracement of death as he puts the barrel of the gun in his mouth and prepares to fire, only to be stopped by the howl of a distant wolf, clinging him to life for just one more day. There's this quote by American author Mary Anne Radmacher that perfectly encapsulates this scene. Courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes courage is the little voice at the end of the day saying, "I will try again tomorrow." The howl of the wolf being the little voice in Otway's head, beckoning him to persevere. The following day, on the plane ride back to civilization, Otway tucks away his letter and falls asleep to dream of his wife, only to be ripped awake by the thrashing of the plane as the horrid weather begins to tear it to pieces. Even amongst the chaos, Otway makes a quick attempt to retrieve his letter as it's the only hope he can hold on to in a seemingly hopeless situation. In the scourge of the crash, Otway again dreams of his wife after losing consciousness and yet again has her ripped away from him as he springs to life. The plane crashes and Otway survives. In spite of his initial bewilderment at the current situation, his first instinct is to start saving people. The man who just a night ago was ready to die goes out of his way to preserve life. As one of the passengers who survived the crash is bleeding out in front of the other survivors, Otway can do nothing but shepherd this unfortunate soul into the afterlife, gingerly telling him that he's going to die and to let death slide over him as he thinks about his loved ones. The group simultaneously understands just how bleak their situation is as the man takes his last breath. Setting up camp for the night, Otway spots what he thinks is another survivor that they missed and rushes in to make another save, but is stopped dead in his tracks when he realizes the person he thought was alive is actually being devoured by a wolf. Historically, wolves have both been feared as predators and revered as supernatural by the humans they encounter. The wolves in The Grey seem to be some combination of both, simultaneously physically assaulting and psychologically tormenting the survivors throughout the night. Wolf attacks on humans being as rare as they are gives an almost sinister intent to the wolves in the film, as they pick off the group one by one under the guise of defending their territory. Realizing that they need to move to a safer location, Otway instructs the others to collect the wallets of the dead to return to the families, and in the process, finds the letter to his wife that he tucked away, once again giving him hope in the hopeless sort of circumstances he finds himself in. The man who was ready to die and thought he had no more good to do for anyone is now made responsible for leading these men through the desolate wilderness to safety, his wife's words echoing in his head. Before leaving, Henrik says a prayer and asks God for his protection on their journey. With the wolves in pursuit, the group is forced to run toward the trees and start a fire to keep them at bay. Around the fire, Diaz says he doesn't fear death and gets called out by Otway, who can see straight through the bravado. The two nearly come to blows over it, and in the tussle, they come face to face with the manifestation of fear and death itself, the alpha wolf. Not just stand out in stature and color compared to the other wolves, the alpha glares at the survivors with bloodlust in its eyes, having no regard for their humanity or will to live. As it takes a step forward, Diaz instinctively takes a step back. However, Otway stands his ground, facing his fear rather than letting it consume him. After sizing them up, the alpha retreats into the unseen void of the wild, leaving the group shaken. Before they even have a chance to collect themselves, Diaz gets ambushed by an omega wolf that's quickly dispatched by everyone else. Not wanting it to go to waste, they decide to cook and eat it for sustenance. In his frustration, Diaz decapitates the omega and gloats in victory to the other wolves watching and throws the head into the darkness, seemingly having conquered his fear. Similar to the Grey, in William Golding's Lord of the Flies novel, the story also follows a group of plane crash survivors who are stranded with no hope of rescue. Some of the young boys in that story give in to their primal savagery and decapitate a pig. That pig being a representation of the evil within the characters, or to put it more unambiguously, the titular Lord of the Flies, the devil. The alpha wolf could also be interpreted as such, being the antagonistic counterforce to the divine intervention from God that Henrik prayed for. Diaz decapitating the omega was a lie to himself. He hadn't conquered his fear because now it's encompassed by the alpha, who's still out there. Courage doesn't always roar, but fear howls. Later that night, the survivors gather around the fire and talk about what keeps them going. For some, it's the chance to have sex again or to see their family again, but for Talget, it's his faith in God to see them through. While wishing he did, Otway doesn't believe in God, but does believe in the tangible memories of his father, specifically his father's penchant for poetry. He then recites an untitled poem his father wrote that he always found comforting, the same poem he read at his father's funeral.
Once more into the fray, into the last good fight I'll ever know. Live and die on this day. Live and die on this day.
The following morning, Burke, who's been battling hypoxia this entire time, is found dead, having succumbed to it in the middle of a blizzard. This gives the remaining few a stark reminder that the wolves and freezing cold aren't the only hurdles to overcome. Illness, injury, and exhaustion all have their roles to play. Thinking of his own mortality, Otway seeks comfort by reading his letter where he once again hears his wife's words, beckoning him not to be afraid. Hearing a river, they decide to head toward it as following it may lead them closer to civilization, but are separated by a huge chasm between them and the nearest tree line. With the wolves at their back, they have no choice but to have Henrik jump off the cliff and into the trees to secure a makeshift rope so they can cross. Due to his fear of heights, Talget is the last to cross, and as a result, the rope snaps, causing him to go careening into the trees, falling all the way to the forest floor. In a state of shock, he hallucinates his daughter right before the wolves ravage his body. I'm not sure if the film is saying this or if it's just my interpretation, but given the thematic relevance, I can't help but feel like if Talget had stepped up immediately to face his fears, rather than delaying the inevitable, his foot may not have gotten caught, the rope may not have snapped, and he may have made it across like the others did. In the climb down, Diaz badly injures his knee, making a horrid situation even worse. Making their way to the river, Diaz has what he calls a clear thought and decides to sit down and give up. With his injuries piling up, he feels like he can't make it the rest of the way. Despite protests from Otway and Henrik to keep going, Diaz resigns himself to his fate, not just by surrendering his wallet, the symbol of their fallen comrades, but by surrendering himself to the moment, claiming he has nothing waiting for him back home and that this moment, this view, is all he has left. Death has a way of humbling us, and in spite of being the most abrasive member of the group throughout their trek, in his swan song, Diaz reintroduces himself to his fellow survivors by his first name, John. Coincidentally, Otway's first name is also John. Not only do the two Johns mirror each other, but they complement one another. The way Diaz quits and is ready for his life to end mirrors the same way Otway at the beginning of the film was feeling. This even gets called out later by Henrik, who saw the look on his face that night, but the difference between the two is that Otway has the memory of his wife to anchor him to life, and Diaz has nothing. He's what Otway could have become had he rested on his laurels and pulled the trigger. Accepting his dying wish, Diaz is left alone to take in the view as the Alpha, as death, slowly stalks from behind. When the wolves burst from the tree line and pursue the two survivors, Henrik slips and falls into the freezing river. Otway bravely attempts to rescue him, but when Henrik's foot gets caught in some rocks, there's nothing he can do. His comrade drowns in his arms in the very river they thought could lead them to salvation. His comrade isn't saved by the God he prayed to earlier. Angered and saddened by this, Otway begins to curse God's name, simultaneously begging and bargaining for divine intervention, going through the 5 stages of grief in about 20 seconds before finally landing on acceptance. No one is coming. Dragging himself through the forest, the exhaustion and hypothermia get the best of him as he falls to his knees. He pulls out the wallets of his fallen comrades and looks at the pictures of their families, giving him a bit of reprieve from his harsh reality. But it swiftly ends as he realizes that he's wandered right into the middle of the wolves' den. The wolves begin surrounding him, preparing to attack, but back down when the Alpha growls to announce his presence, seemingly wanting to kill Otway himself. Feeling more scared than ever, Otway looks down at the picture of his wife and remembers her words once more. Don't be afraid. But this time, we see the memory in full. Otway's wife was sick with some illness and has been dead the entire film. He's been soldiering on in spite of knowing that he was never going to see her again. This revelation to the audience recontextualizes the meaning of "don't be afraid." She wasn't telling him not to be afraid to die. She was telling him not to be afraid to live. The last man standing, the man who was ready to die, is now the man who's choosing to fight to live. With his father, wife, and comrades all gone, he isn't fighting for anyone else anymore. He's choosing strictly to fight for himself. As the Alpha closes in, the man looks into Death's amber eyes and recites his father's poem one last time. And then, roll credits. The abrupt ending was easily the most controversial moment of the film upon release, because the marketing team promised a close quarters fight between Liam Neeson and the Alpha, but I think this was a brilliant move on the part of the director to cut it. The physical fight itself wasn't the point. Like I said earlier, this film is not about the wolves. They just represent abstract ideas like fear, death, and sorrow. And although there's a post-credit scene that implies that Otway won the fight, the result is beside the point. The choice to fight, however, is the point. This film is about a character who's fallen and has to learn to stand back up again. To quote Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius, "When you arise in the morning, think of what a precious privilege it is to be alive, to breathe, to think, to enjoy, to love." Between tragedy and time, there's grief. Between life and death, there's hope. Between the white snow and the black wolf, there's the gray. Thank you guys so much for watching. I know this video was kind of grim, and I apologize for that, but if you happen to enjoy it, feel free to press the like and subscribe buttons. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram, and if you're feeling so inclined, consider donating $1 to my Patreon, because it'll help me, it helps the channel, it just keeps us keeping on. But yeah, that's pretty much it. Till next time, y'all be easy.